He built an empire on fear, but in the end, the only thing that truly terrified Michael Reese was the sound of his daughter crying. For 10 years, he'd been dead to the world, a ghost who'd traded violence for peace, power for parenthood. But when bruises appeared on his children's arms and their laughter turned to silence, the father in him awakened. And so did the ghost. The pipe wrench trembled in Michael's calloused hands as he watched through the laundry room vent. His fiancée, Veronica Hale, stood in the middle of the pristine white kitchen, her face twisted with an anger that made his blood run cold. "Stupid boy," she hissed, shoving 5-year-old Henry against the marble countertop hard enough to make him whimper. "How many times do I have to tell you? The toys go in the box before dinner, not scattered all over the floor like trash." Henry's small hands clutched his arm where he'd hit the edge. His brown eyes, so much like his late mother's, shimmered with tears he tried desperately to hold back. Behind him, his twin sister Rose sat frozen on the floor beside her coloring books, watching in silent terror. "Don't just sit there," Veronica snapped at Rose. "Clean this mess up. Both of you are the same, lazy and spoiled. Your father works himself to exhaustion to keep this house running, and you can't even do one simple thing right." Outside, crouched behind the water heater in the utility closet Michael had converted into his surveillance post, he forced himself to breathe. For 2 weeks he'd been living like this in his own mansion, disguised as a plumber fixing phantom pipe problems. 2 long weeks pretending to be a stranger in the house he'd bought with blood money he'd spent a decade laundering clean. 2 weeks since he'd told Veronica he was leaving for Chicago on extended business. A story supported by an associate he'd paid to take his phone calls and maintain the fiction. "If you disobey me again, you'll go to bed without dinner," Veronica said coldly. "Do you understand me?" Henry nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "Good. Maybe hunger will teach you manners your father obviously couldn't." Veronica stormed out of the kitchen, designer heels clicking against Italian tile that cost more than most people's cars. She nearly collided with Michael as he emerged from the utility closet, grease-stained shirt and tool belt completing the disguise of Mike Rivers, the quiet plumber. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, pulling back as though his proximity might stain her Chanel dress. "Can't you see I'm walking here?" "Sorry, ma'am," Michael said quietly, lowering his head and adjusting the baseball cap that hid most of his face. "I was just checking the water pressure in the laundry room." She eyed him from his worn work boots to his faded denim shirt, her lip curling slightly. "People like you need to learn to be more aware of your surroundings. I hope Martha isn't overpaying you for this work. That leak in the basement still isn't fixed." "I'll get to it right away, ma'am." "You'd better," she muttered, brushing past him. "I don't tolerate incompetence in my house." Her house. Michael's jaw clenched beneath the fake beard he'd glued on that morning. The house he'd bought 5 years ago when he'd first relocated to the suburbs. The house where his late wife had died giving birth to the twins. The house Veronica had slowly transformed from a home into something that felt more like a museum. Beautiful, cold, untouchable. He watched her disappear up the curved staircase, then turned toward the kitchen where his children still trembled. 2 weeks earlier, in a downtown office that smelled of fresh coffee and expensive leather, Michael had sat across from his oldest friend and only remaining connection to his legitimate life. "Daniel Hayes, you're out of your mind," Daniel said flatly, setting down his coffee mug hard enough to slosh liquid onto the mahogany desk. "You want to disguise yourself as a plumber in your own house? This isn't some noir film, Mike. This is real life, with real legal consequences." "It's the only way I'll know the truth." Michael's voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, clenched into fists on his thighs, the knuckles white. "It's potentially illegal," Daniel warned, leaning forward in his chair. "Privacy invasion, fraud, deception. You could lose custody of those kids if this goes sideways." "It's my house," Michael cut in. "My children. How is it invasion to watch what happens in my own home?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through graying hair. "Talk to me. What's really going on? Michael looked out the window at the suburban skyline, so different from the Chicago streets where he'd once ruled through fear and calculated violence. It's the twins, he said quietly. Something's wrong. Henry used to run to me every evening when I came home. Now he hides behind furniture. Rose barely speaks when Veronica's around. And Veronica herself. He trailed off. You think she's hurting them? Michael's silence was answer enough. Have you seen evidence? Bruises? Injuries? Last week, Henry had marks on his wrist. Veronica said he fell playing. But when I asked him about it, he looked terrified, said he couldn't remember. That's when I knew. Michael's voice hardened. That's when I recognized the fear. The same look I used to see in people's eyes when I was someone else. When I was the ghost. Daniel's expression sobered. They'd known each other since before Michael had faked his death and left Chicago. Back when Michael Reese was a name whispered in fear across the Midwest underworld. Back when his late wife, Deborah, had been the only person brave enough to love a monster. If you're wrong about this, Daniel said carefully, you'll destroy your relationship with Veronica and traumatize your kids. And if I'm right? Daniel had no answer for that. Last night, Michael continued, Rose said something that broke me. She whispered, Daddy, when you're gone, the rules are different. When I asked what she meant, she froze, started crying, said she was confused and didn't mean anything. But I saw it in her eyes, Dan. Real fear, the kind I used to cause in people, the kind I swore my children would never know. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, what's your plan? To find out the truth, Michael said. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize to Veronica and get therapy for my paranoia. But if I'm right... His eyes went cold, and for just a second, Daniel saw the ghost of Chicago looking back at him. If I'm right, then I'll do what I should have done the moment I suspected. Protect my children, no matter what it costs. It took Michael 3 days to prepare. He hired a former associate, someone from his old life who owed him favors measured in lives saved rather than money, to make brief, carefully scripted phone calls to Veronica, maintaining the fiction that Michael was in Chicago handling business acquisitions. Then he visited a theatrical supply shop in a neighborhood where no one would recognize him. Bought a realistic beard, a baseball cap with the logo of a local plumbing company, worn jeans with authentic paint stains, and scuffed work boots from a thrift store. Added temporary tattoos different from his real ones, crude designs that screamed working class instead of the expensive ink he'd gotten in his former life. When he looked in the mirror afterward, he barely recognized himself. Mike Rivers stared back, rough-handed, unremarkable, invisible. Everything Michael Reese had once been trained never to be. The conversation with Veronica about his business trip had been tense in ways he couldn't quite pin down. A whole month? She'd asked, her tone more curious than disappointed. Is that really necessary? The Chicago investors want face-to-face meetings for every stage of the acquisition, Michael had explained, using the cover story Daniel had helped him craft. Flying back and forth would be inefficient and expensive. Veronica had nodded slowly, and Michael could have sworn he saw something flicker across her perfectly composed face. Not sadness, not concern, relief. The children will miss you, she'd said, but her voice carried no weight. No emotion. Take good care of them. Michael had watched her eyes carefully. I'm trusting you. Of course, she'd smiled thinly. You can count on me. That night, as Michael had pretended to pack for a trip he'd never take, he'd overheard Veronica on the phone in her study, speaking in a hushed tone he'd learned to recognize. The voice she used when she thought no one important was listening. Yes, he'll be gone for a whole month, she'd whispered. Finally, I can get this house under proper control. Those words had sealed it. The next morning, Mike Rivers, quiet plumber, had arrived for his first day of work. Martha Gibson answered the service entrance when Michael knocked, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked to be in her late 40s, her dark skin warm in the morning light. her eyes carrying the kind of cautious kindness that came from years of domestic work. "You must be the new plumber," she said, her smile genuine but guarded. "Mr. Reynolds, right?" "Mike Rivers, ma'am," Michael replied, lowering his voice slightly and adding a trace of a working-class accent he'd heard in the construction crews he'd once employed. "The agency said you had some water pressure issues." "Martha Gibson," she introduced herself. "And yes, several rooms have been having problems. Mrs. Hale has been quite insistent about getting it fixed." She walked him through the house, explaining the issues with professional efficiency, and Michael studied her carefully. She moved through the mansion with familiarity, but not ownership, someone who worked here, but would never presume it was hers. Yet something in her manner suggested she cared about this place beyond just keeping her job. Veronica swept into the kitchen just as Michael was examining the pipes under the sink. "This is the plumber," Martha said, her tone respectful but not servile. "Mike Rivers." Veronica gave him barely a glance, the kind of dismissive once-over wealthy people gave to service workers they considered beneath notice. "I hope he's more competent than the last one. That man was utterly useless." "I'll do my best, ma'am," Michael said quietly, keeping his eyes on the pipes. "You'd better." Veronica's heels clicked as she moved toward the coffee maker. "I don't tolerate incompetence. This house costs a fortune to maintain. I expect results." For hours, Michael worked in careful silence. His soft hands, hands that hadn't done manual labor in years, blistering inside the work gloves. The physical pain was nothing compared to the ache of watching his own home from the outside, pretending to be a stranger in his children's world. Around mid-morning, the French doors to the backyard opened. 5-year-old Rose stepped out, holding her brother Henry's hand. They moved cautiously, Henry clutching a small truck, Rose carrying a coloring book like a shield. "Who's that?" Rose whispered to Martha, who'd come outside to empty the kitchen trash. "The new plumber," Martha answered gently. "His name is Mike Rivers." Rose tilted her head, studying Michael with the intense curiosity of a child trying to place something familiar in an unfamiliar context. For a terrifying moment, Michael thought she'd recognized him despite the beard and hat. "Where's Mr. Patterson?" Rose asked. "The man who fixed the sink last time?" "He moved to a different company," Martha replied. "Mr. Rivers is helping us now." Michael kept his eyes down, adjusting a pipe fitting he didn't really need to adjust. Hearing his daughter's voice, so small, so cautious, calling him Mr. instead of Daddy, cut deeper than he'd expected. "Good morning," he murmured, not trusting himself to say more. "Good morning," Rose said shyly. Henry just stared, his truck forgotten in his small hand. When they went back inside, Michael noticed how their shoulders hunched, how Rose glanced back at the house like it was a place she had to steel herself to enter. The laughter that used to fill this yard, the sound of his children playing without fear, was gone, replaced by a silence that felt like mourning. By noon, Martha brought him a bottle of water and a sandwich wrapped in paper. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting them on the patio table. "It's just turkey. Hope that's okay." "That's very kind of you," Michael said, genuinely surprised. In Veronica's house, staff didn't usually show this kind of consideration to contract workers. Martha sat in the other patio chair, her own lunch in hand. They ate in companionable silence for a moment, the spring breeze carrying the scent of the roses Michael had planted when Deborah was still alive. "You been doing this work long?" Martha asked. Michael shrugged, chewing carefully through the beard. "Long enough. Honest work is honest work." "Got family?" He paused, the lie bitter on his tongue. "Widower. No kids." "I'm sorry." Martha's sympathy was genuine, and Michael hated that he had to lie to this woman who radiated such basic human decency. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Martha said, almost too quietly, "The children are good kids. Sweet. Just quiet." Michael looked up carefully. Quiet? Martha hesitated, clearly weighing whether she should speak. Then, maybe I'm imagining things. It's not my place. She stood collecting her trash. Forget I said anything. But Michael saw it in her eyes, the same concern that had driven him to this desperate disguise, the same recognition that something in this house was deeply, terribly wrong. The pipes might take a few days to fully diagnose, Michael said, making the decision. If that's all right with Mrs. Hale. I'm sure it'll be fine, Martha replied. She wants the work done properly. That night, through a heating vent Michael had carefully opened to carry sound from the children's room to his surveillance position in the utility closet, he heard Veronica's voice sharp as glass. I don't care if you're tired. Brush your teeth, both of you. And if I find toys on the floor tomorrow morning, you'll learn what real consequences feel like. A small whimper. Rose, probably. Then Martha's voice, soft and kind. It's okay, honey. I'll help you. We'll get it done together. Don't coddle them, Veronica snapped. They need discipline, not a servant cleaning up their messes. Yes, ma'am. Michael stood in the darkness of the utility closet, his hands gripping the pipe wrench until his knuckles ached, and whispered a promise to the shadows. Touch them again, and I'll bury you with my own hands. By the third day, the disguise no longer felt strange. Mike Rivers had become as real as any cover identity Michael had ever used in his old life, perhaps more real, because the stakes weren't money or territory. They were his children. And Michael Reese, the ghost of Chicago, the man who'd once dismantled criminal empires with cold precision, was about to remember exactly what he was capable of when someone threatened his family, even if that someone wore designer clothes and slept in his bed, even if discovering the truth meant becoming the ghost again. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment if you are not in support of mistreating young ones. If you don't subscribe, maybe you're in support of that. Now let's get back into the story. By the fourth day, Michael had perfected the art of invisibility. Mike Rivers moved through the mansion like furniture, present but unnoticed, his eyes downcast, his movements deliberate and slow. He'd learned that wealthy people didn't really see service workers. They saw functions: the plumber who fixed pipes, the maid who cleaned surfaces, the gardener who trimmed hedges. Never the person behind the role. It was perfect camouflage for a ghost. The guest bathroom upstairs is next, Veronica announced that morning, barely glancing at him as she adjusted her pearl earring in the hallway mirror. The shower pressure is unacceptable. I have guests coming this weekend, and I won't have them complaining about inadequate facilities. Yes, ma'am, Michael murmured, tool bag in hand. She swept past him toward her study, her perfume, something expensive and cloying, lingering in the air like a threat. Michael waited until her heels clicked out of earshot, then climbed the stairs with measured steps. The guest bathroom connected to a hallway that overlooked the living room. Perfect acoustics, perfect sightlines, perfect for the micro-surveillance device he'd carried in his pocket since yesterday. He worked quickly, professionally, the blisters on his palms burning as he unscrewed the vent cover. The device, no larger than a shirt button, adhered to the ductwork with industrial adhesive. Wireless, voice-activated, untraceable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. 3 more rooms, 3 more devices. By noon, every major space in the house would feed directly to the encrypted laptop hidden in his utility closet surveillance post. Mr. Rivers? Michael's hand froze on the screwdriver. Martha stood in the doorway, a laundry basket balanced on her hip, her expression curious but not suspicious. Yes, ma'am? He kept his voice level, his Midwestern working-class accent firmly in place. Just checking if you need anything. Water? Coffee? I'm fine, thank you. Michael gestured at the open vent. Just checking the airflow. Sometimes low water pressure is actually a heating system issue. Mineral buildup in the pipes affects everything. It was technical enough to sound plausible, vague enough not to invite follow-up questions. Martha nodded, satisfied, and continued down the hallway. But as she passed the children's playroom, Michael heard it, a small, muffled sob. Martha paused, setting down her basket. She knocked gently on the playroom door. Rose? Honey? Are you okay? Through the crack in the door, Michael watched his daughter's small form curled in the corner, her coloring books scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her shoulders shook with silent crying. I spilled my juice, Rose whispered, her voice raw. Miss Veronica said I was clumsy and careless and that clumsy girls don't get snacks. Martha knelt beside her, pulling Rose into a gentle embrace. Oh, sweetheart, accidents happen. Everyone spills things sometimes. You're not clumsy, you're 5 years old and learning. But she said, I know what she said. Martha's voice was soft but firm. And she was wrong. You hear me? You're a wonderful, careful little girl, and one spilled cup doesn't change that. Rose buried her face in Martha's shoulder, and Michael watched through the gap in the door, his chest tightening with a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. His daughter, crying, believing she was worthless because a woman wearing his dead wife's jewelry had decided cruelty was an acceptable form of discipline. Martha wiped Rose's tears with a clean handkerchief. Tell you what, how about we clean up that juice together and then maybe we'll find some cookies? Our secret. Rose nodded, sniffling. As Martha led her downstairs, Michael forced himself to breathe, to finish installing the device, to maintain the disguise. But the ice in his veins had spread to his hands, and when he gripped the screwdriver to close the vent, his knuckles had gone white. That afternoon, Michael was replacing washers in the kitchen sink when he heard Veronica's voice drifting from the study. Sharp, businesslike. The tone she used for phone calls she didn't want overheard. He moved closer to the study door, which she'd left slightly ajar. A mistake born of arrogance, the assumption that service workers didn't matter enough to eavesdrop. Yes, I understand the timeline, Veronica was saying, but I need the paperwork expedited, the guardianship papers specifically. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's been gone for weeks. Chicago business, very consuming. What? No, of course not. The children are fine. Well behaved. A bit clingy, but that's to be expected with their father absent. Michael's blood went cold. Guardianship papers. The psychiatric evaluation should be straightforward, Veronica continued. We have documentation of erratic behavior, paranoia, substance concerns. It's all fabricated naturally, but plausible enough for a court. Once we have full guardianship, the estate transfers are automatic. He signed those documents months ago without reading them properly. Trusting fool. A pause, then her laugh, cold, calculated, nothing like the warm tone she used in public. The children? Their leverage, nothing more. Once the money's secured, we can discuss alternative arrangements, boarding schools, long-term care facilities, whatever keeps them out of the way. Michael's hand found the doorframe, gripping it to stay upright. Alternative arrangements. She was planning to institutionalize his children, lock them away, rob them of their inheritance and their freedom in one efficient legal maneuver, and he'd almost married her. I have to go, Veronica said abruptly. Someone's in the hall. Yes, I'll call you tonight. Same number. Michael moved quickly, silently, retreating to the kitchen before she emerged. When she passed him seconds later, he was elbow deep in the sink cabinet, the picture of a workman focused on his task. She didn't even glance his way. By evening, Michael had installed 5 surveillance devices throughout the house. The laptop in his utility closet surveillance post now displayed a grid of audio feeds, each room labeled, each conversation captured and archived. He sat in the darkness, headphones on, listening to the sounds of his home through electronic intermediaries. Veronica's footsteps, Martha's humming as she prepared dinner, the twins' quiet voices as they played with blocks in their room. Then, at 6:47 p.m., Henry's voice. Oops. A crash, glass shattering, juice spreading across hardwood. Michael's hands clenched on the headphones. Henry! Veronica's shriek could have shattered windows. What did you just do? I'm sorry, I didn't mean. You never mean to. You're careless and stupid and completely useless. How many times do I have to tell you to use both hands? Both hands, Henry. I forgot, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't clean juice off a floor that costs more than your college fund. Get to your room, now. No dinner tonight. Maybe hunger will teach you to be more careful. Henry's sobs, desperate, terrified, echoed through the feed. Then Martha's voice, quiet but steady. Ma'am, it was an accident. He's 5 years old. Maybe if I just… Don't! Veronica's voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't coddle him, Martha. These children need to learn consequences. Real consequences. Not the soft-handed parenting their father provided. Yes, ma'am. A pause. Then Martha, softer, meant only for Henry. It's okay, honey. I'll clean it up. It's just juice. Everything's going to be okay. But it wasn't okay. Michael sat in the darkness of the utility closet, headphones pressed against his ears, listening to his son cry while a woman he'd trusted berated him for being a child. His hands found the pipe wrench on the shelf beside him. The metal was cold, familiar, solid. He gripped it until his knuckles turned white, until his hands shook with the effort of not moving, not acting, not climbing those stairs, and ending this the way the ghost of Chicago would have ended it. Quick, permanent, without mercy. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not without knowing the full extent of her plans. Not without evidence that would protect his children in the aftermath. So instead, he sat in the shadows and whispered a promise to the darkness. A promise meant for Veronica, though she couldn't hear it. A promise that had waited 10 years to be spoken aloud again. Touch them again, and I'll bury you with my own hands. The words hung in the air like smoke. And somewhere in the house above him, his children cried themselves to sleep while a monster wearing human skin planned their destruction. But the ghost was awake now, and ghosts were very, very patient when it came to settling scores. Martha Gibson had worked in enough wealthy households to recognize when something didn't fit. The new plumber, Mike Rivers, moved through the mansion with a familiarity that contradicted his supposed first week on the job. He knew which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, which rooms carried voices, and he watched. Not the casual observation of a workman, but something more deliberate, the way a man watches his own territory when he suspects invasion. On the 6th day, Martha found him outside the children's playroom, ostensibly adjusting a radiator valve. But his eyes tracked Rose and Henry through the door with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Mr. Rivers?" She approached carefully. "Everything all right?" He startled, just slightly. "Fine, ma'am, just checking the pressure gauge." The house was only 5 years old. Nothing needed checking. When he reached for his tool bag, his sleeve rode up, exposing his wrist. Martha froze. There, beneath fading temporary tattoos, was a small, elegant design in black ink, a chess knight crowned with a single star. She knew that symbol. Had seen it 3 years ago in a newspaper article about Chicago's most notorious strategist. A man called the Ghost who'd vanished without a trace. Michael Reese. Missing. Presumed dead. The man in that article had been clean-shaven, expensively dressed, radiating controlled power. But the eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were the same. "You're staring, ma'am," Mike said quietly, tugging his sleeve down. Martha's heart hammered. "The laundry room. We should talk. Privately." Martha closed the door behind them and turned to face him. "Take off the cap," she said quietly. Michael studied her for a long moment, then slowly he removed it. Without the shadow, the resemblance was unmistakable. "You know," he said. "Not a question." "The chess knight." Martha gestured at his wrist. "I read about you 3 years ago when I was hired. Michael Reese, the ghost of Chicago. Everyone said you were dead." "I was." His voice changed. No more working-class accent, just cold authority. For 10 years. Then I became Michael Rivers, built a legitimate life, had children who would never know what their father used to be. Until Veronica. Until Veronica. His jaw tightened. Tell me what you've seen, Martha. I need to know if my instincts are right. Martha had learned that loyalty to employers kept you employed, but loyalty to truth kept you human. She'd wrestled with that choice since the first time she'd watched Veronica grab Rose's arm hard enough to leave fingerprints. She hurts them, Martha said quietly. Nothing that would show up in physicals, but deliberately. She withholds meals as punishment, spilled juice, toys left out, speaking too loudly. Last week she locked them in their playroom for 4 hours because Henry asked when you were coming home. Michael's hands clenched. 4 hours? I brought them water when she wasn't looking. She threatened to fire me if I interfered again. Martha's voice cracked. But someone had to stay. Those babies needed at least one person who wouldn't hurt them. Why didn't you call me? I tried. 3 times. Left messages with your secretary. Never heard back. I never got them. Michael's eyes went cold. She intercepted them. She manages my communications when I travel. You trusted the wrong person, Mr. Reese. What else have you seen? Martha took a breath. Phone calls, late at night. She talks about guardianship documents. Psychiatric evaluations she's arranging. Money, a lot of it. Says something about securing the estate before he realizes what's happening. Michael's stillness became dangerous. She's trying to have me declared incompetent, control my assets through the children's guardianship. There's more. Martha stepped closer. Last night, she mentioned alternative arrangements for the children, boarding schools, long-term care facilities, places where they'd be out of the way once paperwork was finalized. Her voice dropped. She's not just cruel, sir. She's planning something. The kind of thing you don't come back from. The silence felt like pressure in a sealed chamber. Thank you for protecting them when I couldn't, Michael said quietly. What are you going to do? Martha saw something shift behind his eyes. The father giving way to something older, colder. Gather evidence. Build a case so airtight no court would give her custody of a goldfish. He paused. Then remind her why people used to fear the ghost of Chicago. Martha should have been terrified. Instead, she asked, What do you need me to do? You'd help me? Knowing what I am? I know what you were, Martha corrected. What you are now is a father protecting his children. That's enough, she straightened. So what do you need? Keep protecting them. Be the one constant good thing in their lives. His voice roughened. And if anything happens, if Veronica escalates, you find me immediately. I promise. They stood united by the single most powerful force Michael Reese had ever encountered, the need to protect innocent children from monsters. Martha reached for the door, then paused. She's watching me more closely, suspicious, asking about my background, whether I've been gossiping. She looked back. Whatever you're planning, do it soon. I don't know how much longer I can stay before she fires me. I'll handle it. Mr. Reese? One more thing. Martha's voice went hard. That woman doesn't deserve mercy. Whatever you used to be, whatever methods you used, don't let who you're trying to become stop you from protecting what matters most. Then she was gone, leaving Michael alone with the ghost of who he used to be. A ghost growing stronger by the hour, and hungrier for justice. The lawyer arrived at noon in a black Mercedes, parking discreetly at the service entrance where neighbors wouldn't see. Michael watched from the utility closet surveillance post as Veronica ushered him into her study, a thin man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase that screamed confidential documents. Through the hidden microphone he'd installed 3 days ago, their voices came through crystal clear. Everything's prepared as discussed, the lawyer said. The medical guardianship order, the psychiatric evaluation request, and the estate transfer documents. Once you get two physicians to sign off on his mental instability, the courts will grant you full conservatorship. And the children? Veronica's voice was cool, businesslike. Included in the guardianship, you'll have complete authority over their care, education, and medical decisions. More importantly, you'll control their inheritance until they reach majority age. Which they never will. Veronica's laugh was soft, cruel. Not if the boarding schools I've selected do their job properly. Remote, strict, the kind of places that break difficult children into obedient ones. Michael's hands clenched on the headphones. The documentation you provided should be sufficient, the lawyer continued. Erratic behavior, paranoid episodes, concerns about substance abuse. The psychiatric evaluation will be conducted by Dr. Harrison. He's sympathetic to our position and understands the financial arrangements. Excellent. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. The moment he returns from Chicago, we'll have him evaluated. He'll be declared unfit before he realizes what's happening. Papers rustled. A pen scratched. Veronica was signing documents that would legally erase him from his own life. One more thing, the lawyer said. The children. I've noticed they seem unusually docile during my visits, almost sedated. Veronica's pause stretched too long. They're well-behaved children, disciplined. Mrs. Hale, I need to know if you're medicating them in any way that could complicate the guardianship proceedings. A mild sleep aid, Veronica cut in. Pediatrician approved. They were having nightmares about their father's absence. Just something to help them rest. Michael's blood turned to ice. She was drugging his children. I'd advise discontinuing that before the evaluation, the lawyer said carefully. We don't want any questions about your fitness as a guardian. Of course, I'll stop immediately. She wouldn't. Michael knew it in his bones. The sedation wasn't about nightmares. It was about control. Quiet children didn't ask questions, didn't resist, didn't tell strangers about bruises or missed meals or locked playrooms. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Michael watched through the vent as Veronica showed the lawyer out, her smile perfectly composed, her handshake firm and professional. The moment the Mercedes pulled away, her smile vanished. That afternoon, Martha found Michael replacing a sink trap in the downstairs bathroom. Mr. Reese, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, I need to show you something. She pulled out her phone, an older model, deliberately inconspicuous, and played an audio file. Her voice came through first, asking Veronica about the children's afternoon schedule. Then Veronica's response. Sharp with irritation. Why does everyone suddenly care so much about those little liabilities? They're fed, clothed, and sheltered. What more do children need? Liabilities, ma'am? Burdens, obligations, reminders of a man who's more ghost than husband. A pause. Sometimes I wonder if Michael ever really wanted children, or if his saintly wife trapped him with twins before conveniently dying in childbirth. Martha's gasp was audible on the recording. Mrs. Hale, that's the truth? Yes, it usually is. Veronica's heels clicked away. Finish the laundry, Martha, and stop eavesdropping on private conversations. The recording ended. Michael stared at the phone screen, his reflection distorted in the black glass. Liabilities. She'd called his children, his reason for breathing, for becoming someone better. Liabilities. Yeah, I'm sorry, Martha whispered. I know that was hard to hear, but you needed to know what she really thinks. You did the right thing. Michael's voice was hollow. Thank you. Martha left him alone with his rage. That night, Michael sat in the darkness of his utility closet, headphones on, listening to the audio files from throughout the day, the lawyer's visit, Martha's recording, and finally the sound of Veronica in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared the children's evening juice. The microphone caught everything, the cabinet opening, liquid pouring, then a pill bottle rattling, just once, quickly, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Here we are, Veronica called cheerfully. Apple juice for my little ones. Drink up, both of you. Henry's small voice. It tastes funny. It's organic, sweetie. Healthy things sometimes taste different. Now drink. All of it. 20 minutes later, the surveillance feed from the children's room showed them both asleep. Not the natural sleep of tired 5-year-olds, but the heavy, unnatural stillness of sedation. Michael removed the headphones with trembling hands. For 10 years, he'd been Michael Rivers, legitimate businessman, devoted father, man trying to deserve the second chance his late wife had believed he could earn. He'd buried the ghost of Chicago so deep, he'd almost convinced himself that man had never existed. But sitting in the darkness, listening to a woman drug his children and plan to steal their future, Michael felt something ancient and cold stirring in his chest. He remembered Chicago, remembered being 26 years old, walking into a restaurant where 3 crime family heads were dining, and walking out 20 minutes later knowing all 3 organizations would collapse within the week. No guns, no violence, just information, leverage, and the surgical precision of a man who understood that fear was more powerful than force. They'd called him the Ghost because he could dismantle empires while barely leaving a trace. Because by the time his targets realized they'd been destroyed, he was already gone. That man, the one Deborah had saved with love and patience and the fierce belief that people could change, that man had learned to be a father, had learned gentleness, but underneath, the ghost had never died, just slept, waiting. Michael walked to the utility sink, turning on the tap to wash the grease from his hands. In the dim light, his reflection stared back, bearded, weathered, disguised. He pulled off the fake beard slowly, removed the cap, washed away the grime until his real face emerged. Cold eyes, hard jaw. The face of a man who'd once made Chicago's underworld bend to his will through calculated brutality disguised as strategy. "You wanted peace, Debbie," he murmured to the reflection, to the ghost of his late wife who died believing he could be redeemed. "You wanted me to be better, to leave that life behind." His hands gripped the sink's edge until his knuckles whitened. "But peace died the day I let her into this house." The reflection stared back, and for the first time in 10 years, Michael Reese and the ghost of Chicago looked at each other with perfect understanding. Veronica Hale had made a fatal mistake. She'd threatened his children. And the ghost? The ghost never forgave that kind of mistake. He never forgot, and he never, ever left debts unpaid. Michael reapplied his disguise with steady hands, his movements mechanical, his mind already calculating. Lawyers, judges, psychiatric evaluations, estate transfers, sedatives in juice boxes. She'd built her trap carefully, methodically, but she'd forgotten something crucial. Ghosts didn't play by the rules of the living. And Michael Reese had 10 years of buried expertise waiting to remind her exactly what happened to people who hurt what belonged to him. The game was no longer about gathering evidence. It was about total destruction. And the ghost had just woken up hungry. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, while Michael was installing the final surveillance device in the upstairs hallway. Through the heating vent, he heard Rose's small voice. "I'm sorry, Miss Veronica. I didn't mean to." Then a sharp crack, skin on skin, a child's cry of pain. Michael's hands froze on the screwdriver. "Clumsy little brat," Veronica's voice, shrill with rage. "Do you have any idea how much that vase cost? More than your worthless father pays Martha in a month?" Michael was moving before conscious thought caught up. Down the stairs, through the hallway, toward the kitchen where his daughter's sobs grew louder with each step. He reached the doorway just as Martha burst in from the laundry room. Veronica had Rose by the arm, her small fingers digging into the child's flesh hard enough to leave marks. Rose's face was red, tears streaming, her other hand pressed against her cheek where the slap had landed. Henry cowered in the corner, clutching his toy truck. watching with the wide-eyed terror of a child who knew he might be next. "Let her go." Martha's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "Mrs. Hale, please. She's just a child. It was an accident." "An accident?" Veronica spun, still gripping Rose's arm. "This is the third thing she's broken this month. Someone needs to teach these children the value of property, since their father clearly never bothered." "You're hurting her." "I'm disciplining her." Veronica shook Rose hard enough to make her stumble. "Something you have no authority to question. You're a maid, Martha. Know your place." "My place is protecting children from abuse." Martha stepped forward, her voice rising. "And what you're doing, the bruises, the missed meals, the locked rooms, the sedatives in their juice, that's not discipline, that's cruelty." The kitchen went silent. Veronica's face transformed, shock giving way to cold calculation. "You've been spying on me. I've been watching you hurt babies who can't defend themselves. You've been recording conversations, going through my things, conspiring with—" Veronica's eyes narrowed. "With him, the plumber. I've seen you two whispering in corners, thought you were having some sordid affair, but this is worse. You're gathering evidence." Martha raised her chin. "Someone had to." "You're fired." Veronica released Rose, who scrambled toward Henry. "Pack your things and get out of my house." "It's not your house," Martha said quietly. "It will be. In 2 weeks, I'll have full guardianship, full control. And the first thing I'll do is ensure no one like you ever works in this industry again. I have connections, Martha. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to clean toilets at a truck stop." "That's enough." Martha's voice hardened. "I won't let you hurt these children anymore." Veronica's laugh was sharp, brittle. "You won't let me? You're nothing. A servant who forgot her place." She turned toward the counter, her movements too quick, too deliberate. "Maybe I should remind you what happens to people who betray me." Her hand closed around the knife block. Michael saw it unfold in slow motion. The kind of crystalline clarity that had once made him the most dangerous strategist in Chicago. Veronica's fingers selecting the chef's knife. 8 inches of German steel. Her body language shifting from rage to something colder, more deliberate. Martha saw it too. She moved instinctively, placing herself between Veronica and the children. "Don't! Get out of my way!" Veronica raised the knife, her hand trembling with fury. "This is my house, my rules, and I'm done being questioned by the help." The twins screamed. Rose buried her face in Henry's shoulder. Henry clutched his sister, both of them sobbing in the corner. Martha stood her ground, trembling but unyielding. "You'll have to go through me." "That can be arranged." "Drop it!" Michael's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stepped from the hallway into the kitchen, still wearing his plumber's disguise, tool belt and all. But something in his posture had changed. The deference was gone. The working-class slouch erased. He moved like a predator, precise, controlled, absolutely certain. Veronica spun toward him, knife still raised. "The plumber wants to play hero?" "This doesn't concern you." Michael crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, his hand shot out, catching Veronica's wrist mid-swing with a grip that made her gasp. The knife clattered to the tile. "Wrong." Michael's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. "Everything in this house concerns me." He twisted her wrist, not enough to break it, but enough to make her drop to her knees. His other hand caught her shoulder, pinning her in place with the casual efficiency of someone who'd once subdued much more dangerous opponents. "You forgot who owns this house," he growled, his face inches from hers. Martha stared, her hand covering her mouth. The twins watched with confused terror, not understanding why the plumber sounded so much like their father. Veronica's eyes widened with pain, then narrowed with recognition as she stared up at him, really looked at him, past the beard and the cap and the disguise, into eyes she'd only ever seen in photographs, in newspaper articles about a ghost who'd vanished from Chicago a decade ago. Her expression shifted through shock, disbelief. then finally settled on something that looked almost like admiration. Her lips curved into a cold smile despite the pain in her wrist. "So," she said softly, her voice steady despite her position on the floor, "you finally decided to show yourself." Michael said nothing, just held her there, his grip unrelenting. Veronica's smile widened. All this time, the mysterious trip to Chicago, the convenient plumbing problems, you've been here, watching, gathering evidence like some amateur detective. I said drop it. Michael released her wrist, stepping back but remaining between her and the children. Veronica stood slowly, rubbing her wrist, her eyes never leaving his face. Mike Rivers. Or should I say, Michael Reese? She tilted her head. Or perhaps we should use your real name, the one Chicago's underworld used to whisper in fear. Martha's breath caught. The twins had gone silent, sensing something terrible in the air. Veronica's smile turned predatory. "Welcome home, Ghost. I've been expecting you." The kitchen lights flickered. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. And in that moment, Michael realized his carefully laid trap had just become something far more dangerous. A confrontation between two predators, and only one would walk away. Michael reached up slowly, deliberately, and removed the baseball cap. Then his fingers found the edge of the fake beard, peeling away the adhesive that had held his disguise in place for 9 days. The beard came off in one piece, revealing the face beneath. Rose gasped. "Daddy?" Henry's toy truck clattered to the floor. "Daddy's here, but Daddy's in Chicago. Daddy's been here the whole time, sweetheart." Michael's voice was gentle despite the rage simmering beneath. He kept his eyes on Veronica, who watched with that cold smile still playing at her lips. Martha's hand covered her mouth, though she'd already known. Seeing the confirmation was different, watching Michael Reese emerge from the working-class disguise like a ghost materializing from shadow. "Michael?" Veronica's voice dripped with false surprise. "My God, you're alive! You've been here all along spying on your own family like some paranoid—" She stopped, recalibrating. "Why would you do this? If you suspected something, why not just confront me like a normal person?" "Because normal people don't drug children." Michael pulled a manila folder from inside his tool belt. Documents he'd been carrying, waiting for this moment. "And they don't sign guardianship papers to steal their fiancé's estate." He threw the folder on the kitchen counter. Paper spilled out, photocopies of the documents Veronica had signed with her lawyer. The medical guardianship order, the psychiatric evaluation request, bank transfer authorizations routing funds to offshore accounts. Veronica's smile faltered for just a second. "You went through my private files. That's illegal." "So is fraud, and child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." Michael's voice stayed level. "I have 9 days of surveillance footage, audio recordings, Martha's testimony, the pediatrician's records showing medications you prescribed without consulting any doctor." He stepped closer. "You drugged my children, Veronica. Starved them, locked them in rooms. And you documented everything, every bank transfer, every legal filing, because you thought I was too stupid to notice. You weren't supposed to come back." The words slipped out before Veronica could stop them. Her mask cracked slightly, revealing something desperate beneath. "You were supposed to stay in Chicago for another 3 weeks. By then, the paperwork would be filed, the evaluations complete, and I'd be declared mentally incompetent, with you as guardian of my children and executor of my estate." Michael pulled out his phone, swiping to a document. "Except I was never in Chicago. I've been watching you destroy my family from inside my own house." Veronica's eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, she began to laugh. A sound without humor, sharp as broken glass. "You think you've won? You think some surveillance footage and stolen documents will save you?" She straightened, her composure returning like armor. "Let me remind you of something, Michael. Or should I call you by your real name? The one the FBI spent 5 years searching for before declaring you dead. Michael went very still. Michael Reese, the ghost of Chicago, wanted for racketeering, conspiracy, and orchestrating the collapse of 3 crime families. Veronica's smile widened. You faked your death 10 years ago, created a false identity as Michael Rivers, built a legitimate business on laundered money, and you think I didn't know? Martha's breath caught. The twins watched with confused terror, not understanding but sensing danger. I've known for 2 years, Veronica continued, since before you proposed. Did you really think I fell in love with a boring suburban businessman? I fell in love with power, with money, with the legend of a ghost who could destroy empires. She gestured at the documents. So go ahead. Show your evidence to the police. The moment you do, I'll show them mine. FBI files. Your real identity. Proof that Michael Rivers doesn't legally exist. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You'll lose everything, Michael. The company will be seized as proceeds of crime. This house, your assets, your legal custody of those children, all gone. You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. And your children? Her smile turned cruel. They'll become wards of the state, unless, of course, their legal guardian, me, steps forward to care for them. The silence stretched like wire pulled taut. Veronica thought she'd won. Michael could see it in her eyes, the triumph of someone who'd just played their ace. You're right, Michael said quietly. You did your research, found out who I really am, built leverage against me. He pulled his phone from his pocket again, his movements deliberate. But you made one critical mistake. And what's that? You forgot I spent 20 years reading people, tracking their moves, predicting their betrayals. He pressed play on an audio file. Veronica's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakable. Adrian, darling, the timeline is perfect. Once Michael's declared incompetent, the money transfers automatically. 73 million to the offshore accounts you set up. A man's voice responded, smooth, confident. And Rivers himself? An unfortunate accident. These things happen when paranoid men refuse proper medication, a fall down the stairs, an overdose, something tragic but believable. You're certain you can pull this off? I've been planning it for 2 years. By the time anyone asks questions, we'll be in Monaco with enough money to disappear forever. The recording ended. Veronica had gone completely white. How did you? Adrian Cole. Michael's voice was ice. Your ex-lover, Chicago mobster, my former rival. He held up the phone. You called him last Tuesday, from your study, on a line you thought was secure. But you forgot this house has excellent acoustics. Martha stared. The twins had gone silent. You weren't just stealing my money, Michael continued. You were planning to kill me. Frame it as suicide or accident. Take the children offshore where no one could find them. He stepped closer. That's not fraud, Veronica. That's conspiracy to commit murder. Veronica's hand moved toward her pocket, for her phone probably, or maybe just reflexive panic. Then, in the distance, sirens began to wail. Michael's expression didn't change. I called them an hour ago, gave them everything, the recordings, the documents, Adrian Cole's name. Federal agents are probably already picking him up. You're bluffing. I learned from the best. Michael's smile was cold. Myself. The sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles, coming fast. But Veronica wasn't done. Her shock transformed into something feral, desperate. Her hand shot toward the knife on the floor, the same blade she'd threatened Martha with minutes ago. If I'm going down, she hissed, fingers closing around the handle, I'm taking you with me. Martha screamed. The twins sobbed. Michael moved forward, and in that moment, the kitchen door burst open, but not with police, with something far more dangerous. Veronica's fingers closed around the knife handle with desperate speed. "If I'm going down," she hissed, her composure finally shattering, "I'm taking everything with me." She lunged not at Michael, but at Martha. The maid was closer, more vulnerable, positioned between Veronica and the children who'd witnessed everything. In Veronica's fractured logic, it made perfect sense. Eliminate the witness, grab the twins as hostages, negotiate from a position of power. But she'd miscalculated two things. First, Martha Gibson had spent 23 years working for people who thought she was invisible, learning to read danger before it struck. Second, Michael Reese had spent 20 years as the ghost of Chicago, where half a second's delay meant death. "Down!" Michael's command cut through the chaos. Martha dropped, throwing her arms over Henry and Rose, shielding them with her body as the blade whistled through the space where her throat had been. Michael crossed the distance in 2 strides. His hand caught Veronica's wrist mid-swing, his other hand locking around her elbow. A sharp twist, technique learned in back alleys and mob warehouses, and the knife clattered across the tile. Veronica screamed, fury and desperation pouring out in a sound that barely seemed human. She clawed at his face with her free hand, nails raking skin, drawing blood. Michael barely felt it. Years of rage, of watching his children flinch, of hearing them cry through surveillance feeds, of discovering that the woman he'd trusted had been systematically destroying everything he loved. All of it converged into cold, focused purpose. He swept her legs, bringing her down hard. She tried to roll, to reach for the knife again, but Michael was faster. He pinned her wrist with his knee, his hand pressing her shoulder into the tile. "Stay down," he growled. "You bastard!" Veronica bucked, trying to throw him off. "You think you can— everything I did, you drove me to this. You and your dead wife and your pathetic attempts at redemption." Michael's grip tightened. "You poisoned my children. They were in the way." "Just like she was in the way," Veronica's voice rose to a shriek. "Deborah, with her saintly smile and her belief that monsters could change, she trapped you, made you weak. And those twins, those constant reminders that you chose her over power." "Stop talking." Michael's voice was deadly quiet, but Veronica was beyond reason, beyond self-preservation. "I would have made you strong again, given you back the empire you abandoned. But no, you wanted to play house with brats who look at you like you're some kind of hero when we both know what you really are." Michael pulled out his phone with his free hand, pressed play. Veronica's own voice filled the kitchen, cold and calculating. "The children are leverage, nothing more. Once the money's secured, we can discuss alternative arrangements, boarding schools, long-term care facilities. Whatever keeps them out of the way." Then another recording. "Little liabilities. Sometimes I wonder if Michael ever really wanted children, or if his saintly wife trapped him with twins before conveniently dying. And finally, an unfortunate accident. These things happen when paranoid men refuse proper medication. A fall down the stairs, an overdose, something tragic but believable." Each word landed like a physical blow. Martha clutched the children tighter, their small bodies shaking against her. Henry buried his face in her shoulder. Rose's sobs were muffled but gut-wrenching. Veronica's struggles grew weaker as she heard her own voice condemn her. "Turn it off." "This is what you are," Michael said quietly. "What you've always been. And every police officer outside is hearing it right now." The sirens had stopped. Car doors slammed. Heavy footsteps on the front porch. "Police! Open up!" Michael looked toward Martha. "Take them to the living room, away from this." Martha nodded, gathering the twins and half carrying them through the doorway. Their cries faded down the hallway. Veronica suddenly went limp beneath Michael's grip, her fight draining away. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "You won. Congratulations, Ghost. You get to play hero, save your precious children, pretend you're something other than a killer hiding behind a fake identity." "I never pretended to be anything but a father," Michael said. "Liar." Veronica's laugh was broken, bitter. You loved it, watching me, planning your revenge, becoming the ghost again. You've been alive these past 9 days in ways you haven't been for 10 years. The front door splintered. Boots thundered through the foyer. Police! Hands where we can see them! Michael raised his hands slowly, stepping back from Veronica. Officers flooded the kitchen. 4 uniformed cops with weapons drawn, followed by 2 plainclothes detectives. Michael Rivers, one detective said, holstering his weapon. Or should I say Michael Reese? We need you to step back, sir. Michael complied, moving toward the counter with his hands visible. 2 officers hauled Veronica to her feet, cuffing her wrists behind her back. She didn't resist, just stood there, dress torn, hair disheveled, bleeding from where she'd hit the tile. But as they led her toward the door, she turned back to Michael. Her eyes, once so carefully composed, so calculated, now burned with something feral and desperate. "You'll never outrun your past, Michael," she snarled, her voice carrying over the chaos of officers securing the scene. "You think this is over? You think exposing me solves everything?" The officers pulled her forward, but she kept talking, louder now. "Adrian Cole knows who you are. So do half the crime families in Chicago. You're a dead man walking. You've been dead for 10 years, and the moment they realize you're alive..." She laughed, wild and unhinged. "They'll come for you. All of them. Everyone you ever crossed. Everyone who lost money or power or blood because of your ghost games. Ma'am, you need to..." An officer tried to move her along. "Your children will never be safe," Veronica screamed as they dragged her through the doorway. "Because you'll never be safe. The ghost of Chicago can't hide in the suburbs forever. They'll find you. They'll..." Her voice cut off as the front door closed behind her. The kitchen fell silent except for the crackle of police radios and the murmur of officers documenting the scene. Michael stood by the counter, blood trickling from the scratches on his face, his hands still raised, and felt the weight of Veronica's words settle over him like a shroud. She was right. He'd exposed himself, revealed that the ghost of Chicago wasn't dead, just hiding. And now everyone who'd spent 10 years celebrating his absence would know the truth. That ghosts could come back, and when they did, they brought all their old enemies with them. From the living room, Michael heard Henry's small voice. "Is Daddy in trouble?" Martha's response was too quiet to hear, but Michael knew the answer. Yes, he was in more trouble than he'd been in a decade. Because protecting his children had required becoming the ghost again. And ghosts, as Veronica had reminded him, never really stopped haunting. They just changed what they hunted. The news broke before dawn. Michael woke to his phone buzzing with alerts, dozens of them, cascading across the screen like digital avalanche. News sites, social media, emergency notifications from security systems he'd set up years ago to monitor any mention of his old name. Ghost of Chicago alive, former mob strategist resurfaces after decade in hiding. Michael Reese exposes fiancée's murder plot, reveals false identity. Suburban father was actually legendary criminal mastermind. The story had everything the media craved: crime, deception, child endangerment, a dramatic arrest. Video footage from neighbors' doorbell cameras showed police dragging Veronica from the house. Someone had leaked details about his fake identity. Within hours, Michael Rivers ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Only the ghost remained. By 8 a.m., news vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions through his fence. Helicopters circled overhead, their cameras hungry for shots of the man who'd been dead for 10 years. Michael stood at the window, watching the circus unfold, and felt the weight of his old life settling back over him like a familiar coat he'd tried to burn, but never quite destroyed. "Daddy?" Henry's small voice came from the doorway. "Why are all those people outside?" Michael turned to find both twins watching him, Rose clutching her stuffed rabbit, Henry still in his pajamas, both of them looking small and frightened and utterly confused. "They're reporters, buddy. They want to talk about something that happened a long time ago." Are you in trouble? Rose asked quietly. Martha appeared behind them, her hand resting protectively on Rose's shoulder. She met Michael's eyes, and he saw the question there. What do we tell them? No, sweetheart. Michael knelt to Rose's level. I'm not in trouble, but we might need to go away for a little while, just until things settle down. Like a vacation? Henry's voice brightened slightly. Something like that. By noon, Michael had made the necessary calls. Daniel Hayes arrived first, his briefcase full of legal documents and his expression grim. The FBI's reopening your case. They want you to testify about your old activities in exchange for immunity. And if I refuse? Then they'll prosecute you for fraud, tax evasion, and probably a dozen other charges related to your fake identity. Daniel set down his briefcase. Michael, you're looking at federal prison, maybe 10 years. Martha, organizing the children's belongings in the next room, paused to listen. What about the children? Michael asked quietly. Custody would likely go to next of kin. Your late wife's family, maybe, or foster care if there's no one suitable. Daniel's voice softened. I'm sorry. You did the right thing stopping Veronica, but exposing yourself came with consequences. Michael looked out the window at the media circus, at the life he'd built crumbling under the weight of truth. Set up the meeting with the FBI, he said finally. I'll cooperate. Tell them everything about my old life, but I want immunity and witness protection for my family. I'll do what I can. That evening, as Michael packed essentials into duffel bags, Martha found him in the twins' room. I'm coming with you, she said. No question, statement of fact. Martha, you don't have to. Those children need stability. They need someone who isn't going to disappear when things get hard. She crossed her arms. I've been with them through the worst. I'm not leaving before they're settled. Michael looked at this woman who'd risked everything to protect his children, who'd stood between them and a knife, who'd stayed when every instinct should have told her to run. Thank you, he said quietly, for saving them when I couldn't. Martha studied him for a long moment. Maybe you were saving yourself too. Maybe that's what parents do. We save ourselves by protecting what we love most. The words hit harder than Michael expected. He thought about the ghost of Chicago, the man who'd built empires on fear and calculation. That man had been powerful but hollow, dangerous but empty. This man? The father packing his children's favorite toys? He was terrified and exposed and completely vulnerable. But he was real in ways the ghost had never been. Late that night, after the reporters had finally dispersed and the house had fallen quiet, Henry crept into Michael's room. Daddy? His small voice was uncertain. Are you a bad man? Michael set down the shirt he'd been folding. Come here, buddy. Henry climbed onto the bed and Michael pulled him close. I used to be, Michael said carefully. A long time ago, before you were born, I did things that hurt people, made choices I'm not proud of. Like what? Like being mean to people who didn't deserve it. Taking things that weren't mine. Making people scared because I thought that made me strong. Michael's voice roughened. But then I met your mom, and she taught me that being strong isn't about making people afraid. It's about protecting people who need help. Henry was quiet, processing. Miss Martha says good people make mistakes sometimes. Miss Martha's right. She says you're trying to be better, that's what counts. Michael looked down at his son, this small, brave person who'd survived Veronica's cruelty and still believed people could change. Good people remind us who we can be, Michael said softly. People like your mom. People like Martha. People like you and Rose. He pulled Henry closer. You make me want to be better every single day. Henry nestled against his chest. Are we really leaving? Just for a little while, just until it's safe. Will the bad people from Chicago find us? Michael wanted to lie, wanted to promise absolute safety, but Henry deserved truth. I don't know, buddy. But I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you and Rose safe. That's what dads do. Henry nodded against his shirt, and they sat in comfortable silence until Rose appeared in the doorway, dragging her stuffed rabbit. Can't sleep, she whispered. Come here, princess. Both twins curled against him, and Michael held them while the house settled into nighttime sounds. Somewhere outside, the world was talking about the ghost of Chicago. Federal agents were building cases. Old rivals were making phone calls. But in this room, Michael was just a father holding his children and promising them tomorrow. At 2:47 a.m., Michael's phone buzzed with a security alert. Motion detected at front gate. He moved to the window, careful not to wake the twins sleeping in his bed. Through the darkness, he saw it. A black sedan idling just beyond the property line. No license plates visible. Tinted windows. The kind of car that meant business. The dangerous kind. Michael's hand found his phone, ready to call Daniel or the FBI or whoever could respond fastest. The car sat there for exactly 3 minutes. Then it drove away, slow and deliberate, a message delivered without words. We know you're here. We know you're alive. And ghosts who come back to life? They can die again. Michael watched until the taillights disappeared, then returned to his children. Morning would bring federal agents and legal negotiations and the beginning of whatever came next. But tonight, the ghost of Chicago was just a father watching over sleeping children and remembering why some hauntings were worth the cost, even if they never really ended. 1 year later, Cypress Bay, Oregon. The leak was under the kitchen sink of a weathered beach house, nothing dramatic, just a worn gasket dripping water into a rusted bucket. Michael knelt on the salt-stained linoleum, his real hands, calloused now from actual work, tightening the wrench with practiced ease. Think you can fix it? The elderly homeowner, Mrs. Chen, peered over his shoulder with genuine concern. Already done, ma'am. Michael stood, testing the faucet. Clear water flowed without a drop wasted. Should hold for another 5 years at least. She paid him in cash and homemade cookies, patting his arm like he was a grandson rather than a stranger. You're good at this, Mr. Rivers. Really good. Michael smiled, a real smile, the kind that came easier now. Thank you. It's honest work. Outside, the Pacific crashed against rocks worn smooth by centuries of patience. Michael breathed in the salt air, the smell of redemption mixed with seaweed and possibility. His truck, dented, reliable, completely unremarkable, carried him home through streets where nobody whispered about ghosts or empires. Here, he was just Mike Rivers, the plumber who charged fair prices and showed up on time. The cottage sat 3 blocks from the ocean, small but sturdy, with a porch that caught the afternoon sun. As Michael pulled into the gravel driveway, he heard it. The sound that had once terrified him now transformed into something sacred. His daughter's laughter. Rose sat on the porch steps, her coloring book spread across her lap, while Henry built an elaborate sandcastle in the front yard. Martha watched from a weathered rocking chair, her hands busy with knitting, her presence as steady as the tides. Daddy! Henry looked up, his face bright and open in ways Michael had feared he'd never see again. Look, I made a moat. That's incredible, buddy. Michael knelt beside him, examining the architectural achievement with appropriate seriousness. But you need a drawbridge. Every good castle has one. Will you help me? After dinner. Promise. Rose abandoned her coloring to wrap her arms around Michael's waist. Mrs. Patterson said we can adopt a dog. Can we, Daddy? Please? Michael glanced at Martha, who shrugged with mock innocence. I may have mentioned the shelter had puppies. A small dog, Michael conceded, and Rose's squeal of delight echoed across the neighborhood. Inside, the cottage smelled of Martha's cooking, something warm and uncomplicated, the kind of meal that filled more than stomachs. Family photos lined the walls now, Henry and Rose at the beach, Martha teaching them to bake, Michael helping with homework at the kitchen table. No pictures of Veronica, no remnants of the mansion, just life distilled to its essentials. Mail came, Martha said quietly, handing Michael an envelope as the children ran to wash up. Federal seal, official weight. Michael recognized it immediately, the kind of summons that couldn't be ignored forever. Subpoena to testify in United States versus Adrian Cole. Michael stood at the window watching his children play in the fading light. A year ago, this letter would have triggered panic, calculations, the instinct to run. Now, he simply folded it and set it on the counter. "You're not going," Martha observed. Not a question. "The FBI has everything they need, recordings, documents, testimony from others." Michael's voice was calm. "Adrian Cole's facing 30 years regardless. My children need stability more than prosecutors need another witness. They might insist. Let them." Michael turned to face her. "The ghost of Chicago is dead, Martha. He died the day I realized being powerful meant nothing if I couldn't protect what mattered most." Martha studied him with eyes that had seen him at his worst and his best. "And who are you now?" "A father. A plumber. A man trying to deserve the second chance his family gave him." He paused. "Thanks to you. I just did what was right. You stood between my children and a knife. You saved them when I couldn't." Michael's voice roughened. "That's not just anything. That's everything." Martha's eyes glistened, but her smile was steady. "They're good kids. They deserved someone in their corner." "So do you." Michael gestured at the cottage, the life they'd built. "This isn't much, but—" "It's home," Martha interrupted gently. "And that's more than enough." That evening, after dinner and the promised drawbridge construction and bedtime stories that ran long because Rose kept asking for one more chapter, Michael stood on the porch alone. The ocean whispered in the darkness. Somewhere in cities he'd left behind, people still talked about the ghost of Chicago. Federal agents still built cases, old rivals still made plans. But here, in this small coastal town where nobody cared about empires or legacies or the weight of past sins, Michael Reese had found something more valuable than power: peace, purpose, the daily miracle of children who laughed freely. He thought about Deborah, his late wife who'd believed monsters could change. She'd been right. Change wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was choosing compassion over calculation, day after day, leak after leak. The screen door creaked. Martha joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "They're finally asleep," she said, handing him one. "Good. Henry's been running on pure excitement since you mentioned the puppies." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. "Do you miss it?" Martha asked eventually. "The old life? The power?" Michael considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But then Henry asks me to fix his toy truck, or Rose draws me a picture, and I remember—" He paused, finding the words. "Real power isn't making people fear you. It's making them feel safe." "And do you feel safe?" "Getting there." Michael sipped his tea. "One day at a time." Inside, the cottage settled into nighttime sounds. Outside, the world continued turning, dangerous, complicated, unforgiving. But on this porch, in this moment, Michael Reese had everything that mattered. His hands were finally clean. His children were finally safe. And the ghost? The ghost could rest. Michael's voice drifted into the darkness, a whisper meant for himself, for Deborah's memory, for the man he used to be. You can't fix the past. But sometimes, you can rebuild what's left, one leak at a time. The ocean answered with patient waves. And somewhere in the cottage, his daughter laughed in her sleep. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine.